Hey folks, welcome to another review of the final season of Outlander. Now, for sure, last week was one of the worst and most misjudged episodes in the whole show, and definitely has been the low point of this season so far. But, hopefully, that means things can only really go uphill from here. And there's also a bit more hope because this is the first episode written in several seasons by Ron Moore himself, the guy who kick-started this whole shaboodle back in season 1. Yep, Ron, the old showrunner, is the lead writer on this week. Is the episode any good? Has he lost his touch? Can anything be salvaged at this point? Let's find out. Episode 808, In the Forest, starts out at the Ridge, with a final goodbye to Fergus as Parsley and Jamie have a bit of a chat about him, about how he loved being Jamie's son, and about how her plans for the future involve her taking the inheritance due to him and continuing printing propaganda. Mainly because she needs to feed her 500 half-French mushroom kids, and she's got another one brewing in the oven. After that, it's back to all the war business because Bree and Roger coming home means also the guns have arrived, and they can start arming the militia. And Bree, being a bit of a gun nut, says that she's all about the guns and shooting, right up to the extent that Frank ended up nicknaming her Deadeye, which is kind of a revelation to Jamie because, turns out, that's who he dedicated the book to. And all of that makes Jamie and Claire realise that Frank probably wasn't writing the book just to mess with Jamie's head, but more likely as part of his ongoing preparation and instruction to make sure that Bree was the most awesomest time traveller ever should she ever come looking for Jamie. Good old Frank. So it ends up being montage time because everybody's prepping for war and there's only a couple of months to go. And Bree starts trying to figure out how she can manufacture a hull breech loading rifle, which is something that actually isn't going to be invented for another 30 years. It's a kind of gun that can be loaded and shot much faster than their normal rifles, and because she's basically MacGyver, she manages to do it. Additionally, we actually get Buck's story about how he put an end to the Rob Cameron problem. Turns out he used a pointy knife. Job's a good one. And just then, William turns up, because, of course he does. And he's been having all sorts of issues because he's still cross with Jamie for existing and making him exist, and he's annoyed with John for being gay and not telling him, and he really just kind of wants to hang out with his sister Bree. So he does, and they chat for a bit. But then everyone has a big dinner where Roger announces his upcoming ordination as a minister, and William gets cajoled into going fishing with Jamie. And they end up fishing, and then they end up arguing because, turns out, William hates everybody having secrets. Like John being gay, and Jamie never telling him that he was his real dad, apart from that time that he pretended he was, and then pretended it was a joke, because they were going to be murdered by Cherokees. And William's had about enough of this, and he's about to head home when Claire gives him a telling off, and immediately he's all like, I suppose I might be wrong. Then he sees Jamie doing a bit of horse riding and has a meaningful flashback montage, just like last week. So William decides he should make his amends, so he heads off to find Jamie when he's in the middle of his battle practice. Just at the same time as Whittaker rocks up to say he's going to join the battle party with his mates as well. So Jim and Bill head off to hunt a stag, and after shooting it, they have a proper father-son chat, where each one of them reveals their inner pain, and all is kind of forgiven in a wave of manly tears and some hugs. Aww. Meanwhile, wee Fanny's been having a bit of a bad time, because turns out the boys in town saw the pamphlet all about her sister, and told her that her sister's gone to hell, on account of doing a murder and also doing a suicide, not apparently on account of being a whore and doing incest with her cousin. Apparently.
Is worth 6 shillings.
And Rachel tries to cheer wee Fanny up, and yeah, she's not really feeling it, and she's not even happy when Roger turns up and says he wants to do his ordination. So in the end they have a wee chat, and Roger tells her that Christianity is kind of a bit of a varied thing and not everyone agrees, and as far as he's concerned, Janie isn't in hell, so why not go off and pray a bit? So Fanny goes off to pray and chat at the cairn with Janie, and then she finds a green gem on the ground, and she picks it up and it cracks and she hears bee sounds. Oh, remember what that means. Meanwhile, back in Savannah, John and Pigsty are having a game of Where's Willie? Not like that. No, they're just chatting about where William is, and John's very much of the case of, just stop worrying about it, he's fine. But then later she pops in again and says, oh, the letter came for you, maybe it's news from William. And he's like, no it's not, go away. It turns out it's a letter from John's ex-boyfriend saying that he finally knows where Richardson is, the guy he's been looking for. So John goes off to his office, and after hanging about and waiting, Personally finally turns up and he's like, oh yeah, sorry I was busy, but I did find him. And John's like, really? And then Richardson pops in and goes, yup, and knocks him out, because of course he does.
Uh-oh, Shaggy. What's going to happen now?
End of episode. So what did I think? Well, this was kind of a mixed episode, but as I said in the intro, expectations were low, especially after last week. But I did think this was better, and there was actually some fun to be had with this week, and some interesting bits and bobs. Also, I'd like to start this out by saying I made some pretty disparaging comments last week about Tracy Deer, the director. But this week I think she actually did alright. I think this material really worked for her style, and it didn't hurt that this week the plot actually felt like it was a little bit less daft than most of the nonsense that came up last week. And again, the writing being pretty decent didn't hurt it. Now, this was a week that was plainly had a lot of themes about fatherhood laid out over a few different storylines, and I like consistent storylines and themes. You know that. Also, it felt like an episode that was tying up character threads, presumably so we can actually move into the last few episodes without having a whole load of outstanding bad blood between the characters hanging over everything. Because, I mean, we are coming up to the end of this show, not just the end of the season. So there's really no point having some kind of long-held grudge standing out. I mean, we wrapped up the why did Frank write the book storyline thing. We've got Jamie and William actually liking each other. We've said goodbye to Fungus, and Parsley's now got a big chunk of change to fix all the problems in her life, probably. We got the answer to what Buck had been doing with his time travelling and how on earth he managed to go back and forward from back in the 17-somethings to the 1980s, which was kind of a weird throwaway joke about his parents, but it was kind of a giggle. And then the wee scene of him doing a Malky, fair enough. And for the most part, most of this worked. You know, it wasn't bad, and the actors did pretty well with it. And especially, you know, it was nice to see Charles Vandervaart actually have something to do that was less of the thankless task he's had for most of the season playing William. And he's mainly been backsliding this season into being a grumpy wee brat over and over again, and it feels like finally we got a bit of emotional payoff and him cheering the hell up a little bit. And I'm glad of that. This week there was a lot of Jamie stuff, which allowed, you know, Sam Hewn to do a bit of acting, and it was a bit more subdued than I'd expected. I mean, compared to like last week with a lot of the silent, brooding sadness acting. You know, considering this is him essentially saying goodbye to one son and then making sure he doesn't lose another son, it was pretty well done. It was tastefully done as well. And this episode was definitely thematically dad stuff. I mean, similarly, it was interesting that we had Bree referring to Frank as my father rather than daddy as she usually does, and Jamie being less awkward about it than he often is. And for the most part, you know, it worked. We also had the side story of Fanny having her existential crisis about her sister, and it was also a bit of a crisis of faith, you know, badumch. But we also had Roger being a bit fatherish about that and helping, also being a good shepherd because he's just about to become a minister, for real this time. And this week they've even got Rachel something to do. And they managed to find Claire something to do. You know, it was fine, the scene was okay. Wasn't great, but it was okay. But it really did also feel like they had to find Claire something to do. Which leads me on to all the things that I was slightly less happy about this week. So, again, I'll preface this with the fact that nothing this week was anywhere near as bad as last week. Last week was abominable. But there were a few little things and overall arising issues this week, rather than huge clangers. So, to continue what I was saying a minute ago, Claire had almost nothing to do this week. She was barely even in this episode, and the one scene that she was in, it felt a little bit clunky. It felt a little bit like she came out and she said something and just immediately William goes, "Grr," and then she says, "Really?" And then he's like, "Okay, you're right, actually I'm wrong, I'm bad, I'm being silly." And it felt like, well, the only reason it worked was because they decided Claire should say something and he's immediately going to change his mind because Claire said something. It didn't feel like she actually made a great argument. Now, they needed to have Claire do something this week because ostensibly Claire is the main character, and I don't want to belabor the whole Claire and Jamie aren't the focus in these seasons as much as they have been previously because I've said it so many times before. Even though, if you look on Twitter and stuff like that, oh my god, almost every single fan who bothers to post on Twitter about this, that's all they talk about is why isn't there more Claire and Jamie scenes? And I completely get that. But at this point, I have made my peace with the fact that Claire and Jamie are not really the focus at this point in the story in the way they were in the first few seasons, and the show is struggling with that. But this week, she had fewer lines than wee Ian and Rachel did, and that's kind of mental. And that scene aside, yeah, she basically had nothing to do this week. But more of that, the people who did have stuff to do, some of it was a bit bizarre. Now, the William and Jamie storyline, cool, that was fine. It was the main arc of the episode. But the Roger and Fanny's religious nonsense, that was kind of the B-plot line. And it wasn't acted badly. Like, as I said, this little kid's pretty good, and Richard Rankin, when he bothers to actually try, he's pretty decent in this. But the entire plotline didn't really do anything. I mean, I wasn't sure what the point of it was. What's the point of Fanny in this story? Who is she in this story? Why is the show making her such a big part of what's going on in the plot? Is it going to go somewhere? I mean, yeah, she picked up a stone and it broke. I mean, yeah, wee Jemmy did that a few seasons ago, and that was to establish that he has strong time travel powers. So cool, Fanny has time travel powers. I thought we just kind of knew that was probably the case. But she's a very, very long way from the stones. Unless, and I really hope they don't do this, but unless by making a cairn they've accidentally made themselves a TARDIS, that anytime any time traveller builds a stone cairn, if they actually go up and touch it, that means they automatically zoop back in time. I mean, that would be a bit crazy. Although, it might be quite funny if they use this and she manages to time slide sideways into Blood of My Blood and she continues in that season. I mean, you know, well done for the actress if that happens. Gives her something else to do. I seriously hope not. Partly because I then might have to watch the TV show to see what madness they do with it. I also don't entirely understand where this suddenly being angry at God bit came from. It felt like it came from nowhere, instead of something that we've been building up to. And I think the whole Fanny story so far this season hasn't made a lot of sense. And it's clearly that they want to do something with it in the last few episodes. But what? It also doesn't, as I said, it doesn't really reference the A-plot, and the B-plot should usually be a reflection of the A-plot told from a slightly different direction, and I don't think, other than Roger being a bit fatherly, I don't think it really managed to do that. Also, the Lord John storyline, what even was this? I mean, could they not have afforded some extras to play a servant to give him a letter and have Pigsty come into the room, or have them be in a different room? I mean, this felt really lazy, because it was the same room, almost the same camera angles, her coming in almost exactly the same way. It felt really lazy, or contrived, or like they had to just do this at the last minute to get them to do something. But then suddenly John gets blackjacked by Richardson, who, I mean, I've finally remembered his name. It's in my head now, and that was only because I got confused and thought he was Ferguson. I thought, oh wait, are all these storylines converging because this is the same guy? But no, it's a different guy. They're not combining these two. And also, are we actually going to see Ferguson? I don't think we have seen him. I mean, which might means he's going to be an interesting cameo from another actor that we've not seen, but we haven't heard anything announced. And it bugged me because they mentioned the Ferguson rifles. Not that they mentioned them. That wasn't the problem, because it's a nice little historical note that yes, he did invent a breech-loading rifle, but according to Wikipedia, they never used the Ferguson rifles at Kings Mountain. I mean, the show hasn't said they will, but you know. They mentioned that the rifles are difficult to make. That apparently was true. They're also apparently really prone to breaking. But that brings me on to the Hall rifle. Now, the Hall rifle is apparently a simpler rifle, but I'm pretty sure it's not simple enough that Bree can just manufacture them in that shed at the back of the house using what, a hammer and tongs and a couple of old rifles. I mean, they don't have that many rifles that she can just dick about with them forever trying to manufacture something. And you're also getting into the point where we're literally, are we doing the Star Trek 4 thing where they go back in time and they realize they need special glass, so they just invent it while they're there?
You realize, of course, that we give him the formula. We're altering the future.
Why? How do we know he didn't invent the thing?
I mean, is this going to be the point? Is Bree going to go somewhere with his rifle and then the guys want to walk past and they go, what's your name? And you go, well, I'm Private Hall. What a nice rifle. I wonder if I could take this apart and remake it. And yeah, I mean, I don't think they're going to do that, but I feel like at this point there is absolutely no limit to the kind of daft stuff they're doing. But it also annoys me because we're back to Bree being MacGyver. Now, I mean, she's just basically a TV scientist now who can make whatever episodes need because,
I like science.
It's just hokey, and I don't like it. I mean, Back to the Future thinking might be fun occasionally, but the show, I just don't know where it's going at this point. The fact that they claimed literally at one point, we can't change the past, and then they say, actually, we have changed it a little. It's like, did they? I thought the whole point is we'd established they can't change the past at all, and that everything they do was already what happened. But, I don't know. So we're going into the last two episodes, and I don't know what the hell's happening now. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves me kind of mixed on this week. I didn't dislike the episode, but I didn't love it either. It was a pretty run-of-the-mill Outlander mid-season filler episode in a lot of ways. I mean, compared to last week, it was written by Shakespeare and directed by Steven Spielberg, but other than tying up loose ends, it didn't really do an awful lot for me, and it really did feel far too much like a show tying up loose ends. I mean, on the other side, I'm glad. It means that we can go into the final 2 episodes with clear feet. Nobody has outstanding grudges left, pretty much all the other storylines are tied up. I mean, maybe aside from William and John getting kidnapped means that William and Pigsty can presumably go rescue him and forgive each other, and then maybe reunite with Ben. That was my guess as to what was going to happen with that storyline, and then Jamie and everybody else would go off to King's Mountain, so like Roger, Buck and Ian and everyone, and the boys would go off and fight, and maybe Bree and Claire would go off to do a bit of doctoring to look after them. But that's not what the next week's clip-on looks like. In fact, it looks a lot more like next week is going to be Jamie, Claire and William going off on a rescue mission to get John, and then having a bunch of philosophical chats about, oh, Jamie's off to King's Mountain, what are we going to do, treading in a circle again. Which I really hope they're not going to do, but it wouldn't surprise me if that's what they're planning, because that's a pretty normal penultimate episode thing for Outlander. It really shouldn't be that surprising to me at this point. But maybe it's because I was hoping for a cliffhanger, which I think I was. But it looks more like, if that's the case, the finale might be like, hopefully an extra extended length episode that's gonna maybe even be movie length, who knows, and then they'll go all out and tie it up in something special. And we can only hope so, because otherwise, why are we even watching this show at this point? Because if it's just gonna grind to an ignominious halt, that would be a real shame. But what did you think about this week, and what do you think about going forward to next week? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, these have been my grumpy opinions.